D. James Kennedy Ministries presents Truths That Transform.
What do movements from Antifa to global warming alarmism, from campus protesters to the kneeling NFL players have in common? The answer might surprise you on today's Truths That Transform.
This is Truths That Transform.
Welcome to Truths That Transform, a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries, where we are standing for truth and defending your freedom. Recent unsettling events in the United States have many of us on edge. It seems that America is more divided now than at any time, at least since the Vietnam War. Every single aspect of life is now political and factious, whether it's a series of damaging hurricanes or a tragic mass shooting. People seem to waste no time in scoring all the political points they can in favor of their agenda. But this is not by accident. Indeed, the politicizing of every part of life and the dividing of America is itself part of a leftist political agenda. One person who has seen that firsthand is Dr. Cal Beisner, who is the national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. The Cornwall Alliance does the work of debunking climate alarmism, which rather than being a scientific issue has become thoroughly politicized. He joins us now to talk about these recent developments. Cal, thanks for being with us.
Frank, good to be back with you.
Glad to
Thanks
have
very
you
much.
here. It seems to me that the question of climate change ought to be largely a scientific issue, but in our day, it seems increasingly political. How do you see that?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of very fascinating scientific things to look into about climate change, and so there is a lot of science that needs to be done. But I think you're quite right. It's become far more a political issue. People have taken a bit of a misunderstanding of climate science and turned that into a rationale for all sorts of policies that expand government control over individual people's lives.
Give us a specific example of that. Why would someone benefit from politicizing something like climate science?
When you want to force a huge transformation of the world's whole energy system, how we provide electricity to homes and businesses, how we provide fuel for vehicles and airplanes and ships and the like, if you want to transform an entire energy system, that requires an enormous shift of all sorts of infrastructure, and it gets government involved in every aspect of people's lives because we use energy for everything that we do, for growing food, making clothing, making shelter, making transportation. Your iPhone uses energy. Energy is part of everything that we do. So if you have a fundamental philosophy of government that says the government should be running our lives. We're better off if things are centrally planned, centrally controlled. Boy, climate change is your dream come true because it's your excuse for all of that.
Yeah. When government regulates, it almost always over-regulates, and with that comes a massive bureaucracy. So it's about power and control. What else? What else is it? Do you see from a political standpoint?
The heads of the largest environmental advocacy organizations in the world tend generally to agree that optimal human population would be about 500 million people, perhaps only 300 million people in the entire world, which means that we need to get rid of something around about 95 to 97% of us. Well, this is a demand for population control in a very, very powerful way that would just reach into every aspect of our lives. So this leads to government family planning programs that can often incorporate highly incentivized or even coercive sterilization of men and women, and even coercive or highly incentivized, again, abortion. And this, again, is another reaching of government into people's lives. If you have a fundamental philosophy that says government is your God, a Hegelian Marxist understanding of the state, this, again, is part of your dream come true.
Help us understand how, in this particular case, we're talking about climate change and using that as a springboard to greater government control, greater regulation, insertion into the family, all these things.
Yes.
Explain how that, though, is part of a larger political agenda, not just climate change.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the agenda is to increase government control over people's lives because you have a fundamentally statist philosophy. Well, ultimately, what you want is the ideal state, the perfect state. Mm-hmm. But as long as there are multiple states, there's going to be competition among them, and you can never say you've reached this ideal. So, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had this notion that over time, the states, individual states would wither away, and they would be replaced by a communist society all over the world.
So when you look a little deeper, you see that whether it's climate change or whether it's government spending or whether it's education, you see the fingers of a kind of a Marxist socialist agenda trying to reassert themselves in new ways. The economic Marxism has failed everywhere it's been tried. And their argument is what? That it didn't work because these institutions are preventing it from working, such as what? Family, marriage?
Sure, family, marriage, church, independent businesses. Many of the intellectual leaders of the Marxist movement around the world realized we're not going to be able to promote our philosophy of the state on the basis of claiming we're going to bring you up out of poverty. They hitched their wagon to the growing green movement, the environmentalist movement, because they said, all right, look, capitalism may produce more wealth than communism does, but the problem is that it destroys the environment while it's at it. Businesses don't care if they harm the environment. And so government needs to take over directing businesses in order to protect the environment.
Cal, thanks for being with us. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure too, Frank. Thanks very much for having me back.
Thanks. At root, of course, this battle is a spiritual one. Marxism is an all-encompassing worldview. Its practitioners, therefore, naturally want to extend the reach of this noxious ideology to every last facet of life. But at root, Marxism and the communism for which it works is antithetical to Christianity. In an era when an NFL quarterback who wears Fidel Castro t-shirts can spark national news by kneeling for the national anthem, we really need to understand this far better. Dr. D. James Kennedy helps us with this portion of his message, The Beginning of the End of Communism.
For the past 25 years, I have stood on one or two occasions in each of those years in the pulpit of this church to warn about the dangers of communism, about the danger which it presented not only to the freedom of America in general, but to the very existence of Christianity in particular. Some have said in the past, and some may say today, that communism is a political matter and does not belong in the pulpit, or it is not a spiritual concern. Is it not now? I find it absolutely incredible that anyone could have lived in the 20th century so long and not be aware of the real nature of communism and be so blind to the real issues of our time. Communism, at its very heart, is a religion. It is the religion of anti-God. It is an all-out attack a satanic attack on God and Christ and religion in general. You remember that when Karl Marx was asked by a newsman what he was attempting to do, he said two things. One, dethrone God, and two, destroy capitalism. Notice the order of priorities. In North Korea, when the communists came into South Korea, they sprayed congregations on Sunday mornings with gasoline and turned flamethrowers on them. Indeed, a baptism of fire, not a matter of spiritual concern. Indeed, it is a concern to every Christian. And may I say this, the great threat of nuclear disaster is not due to the existence of nuclear missiles. Now, some of you will say, why, that is heresy. That is just exactly the opposite of what all sorts of various liberal organizations are saying. I will prove my point. The empire has enough missiles to destroy every major city in America, and yet not one person in this country is concerned about that threat. Why, you say that does not make sense. Millions of people are concerned. I didn't clarify which empire I was referring to. I was referring to the British Empire, which does indeed possess enough nuclear missiles to destroy every major city in America. And no one is losing any sleep over that fact. It is not the existence of missiles. It is the aggressive determination on the part of communists to dominate and conquer the world that presents the great threat of nuclear holocaust in our time. What then should we do? We need to take far more seriously than we have the great task of evangelism and world evangelization through missions. Truly, it is the gospel of Jesus Christ alone that can ultimately set men free. And it is the gospel which is the greatest bastion even against political tyranny. Nowhere where the gospel of Christ has really been enshrined in its purity in the hearts of people have the communists been successful in overthrowing a nation. We need to make every effort to see that that gospel is spread around this country. We need to realize that those who are indifferent to the challenge of the Great Commission to take the gospel to every creature here and throughout the world are lending their own support to the ultimate conquest by tyranny in this world. This is the great hope that we have.
Communism as a government system has fallen on hard times, having failed everywhere it's been tried. But the ideology that drove communism is alive and well right here in America. It's vitally important that you understand the influence of what is called cultural Marxism on our campuses, in our sports arenas, and on our families. Our own Dr. Jerry Newcomb has more.
Just using a little pepper spray. Here comes the bomb. Oh, yeah!
It's very disconcerting if you believe in freedom of speech, if you believe in dialogue and free flow of ideas. And what you've seen is almost a complete takeover of the secular university by the progressive left. And so they don't want free speech. They don't believe in free speech. They believe in free speech for themselves, and they do not want to engage in dialogue. They want to shut you down if you disagree with them.
The issue that's going on here is a fascinating principle of what is called cultural Marxism. There was a man by the name of Marcuse in the Frankfurt School of the communist thought in Germany in the last century, who after realized there was not going to be a great collapse of the West in the communist revolution, they sat down and rethought everything. They said the battle is not going to be economic, it's going to be cultural. In a Marxist system, there's always a clash, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the cultural struggle.
Marx argued that all religion was superstition.
He is Lord of everything.
That it was just hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo. In fact, Marx and Engels' ideas, and they developed them in partnership, really started out with religion as the number one question. They came to socialism not primarily through their analysis of politics and economics, but as very young men in their angry analysis of religion, which they thought was a terrible imposture, and they wanted to tear it down. And they said that very clearly.
In the 1920s, in Greenwich Village, there was a cabal of brilliant young thinkers: Will and Ariel Durant, Edna St. Vincent Millay, John Reed, a host of marginal figures like Margaret Sanger and Roger Baldwin. They met together and they thought about why it was that the revolutions of radical secularism had failed so miserably in Europe. Why had the French Revolution failed? Why had the revolutions of 1848 failed? Why had Marxism not swept across the whole of the world? They determined that in order for America to become a truly secularized state, they would have to capture what they called the robes.
The robes, as they called them, were the courts, academia, and other places of power.
Well, what we've witnessed in the last 35 to 40 years is an acceleration of that process. The organizations that they founded back then, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and a host of others, are the institutions that are now wresting power from the original foundations and bases of American freedom and life, Christian institutions, Christian worldview thinking. Tear away the roots, tear away the foundations. How will the edifice stand? It can't.
The university, the media, the church. If we can control those centers of thought, we will begin to fire with our intellectual ammunition until we neutralize the enemy. Well, and of course what they've done now by their Marcusian principles of politically correct speech. What is that? You can't say something that's true. If you can't speak about it, you can't deal with it. You can't think it.
One of those who knows Marxism, cultural or otherwise, firsthand is David Horowitz, noted conservative author and publisher of Front Page. He grew up as a communist in America.
My parents were card-carrying members of the American Communist Party, and our whole community of friends were members of the Communist Party. Everybody that we trusted or took into any kind of confidence was a communist.
But as he grew older, Horowitz started to see that the results of Marxism were not the promised utopia.
We are fallen beings and corrupt beings, and therefore you can't redeem the world through human agency. People who call themselves progressives and liberals, those people killed 120 million people since 1917 in the name of creating a better world. Their vision is creating heaven on earth.
He changed from a communist to a conservative because he saw that communist ideas didn't work in the real world, and certainly not in ways that brought about true justice. But that change resulted in consequences.
I lost every friend that I ever had. By then, how old was I? I was 45 years old, and I lost every single friend that I ever had. I cannot go on an American college campus today without a bodyguard. And usually the university will assign half a dozen to a dozen armed security guards because of the left. I think it's just tragic what's happened to our campuses.
In Marxism, there's only the Marxist way, power. That's what we're fighting. And so the Christian needs to learn this issue as deeply as we know the arguments about why we believe the Bible's inspired. We need to know these arguments as well as we know why we believe in creation rather than atheistic evolution. We need to know these principles, and we're largely living in a cocoon because we're not paying attention to them. Because we say communism died. Well, maybe economic communism died, but cultural Marxism is alive and well, and it's seeking to strangle us just as much as ever the Marxist tradition wanted to do.
As you have just seen, the societal battles which we see occurring today have a root cause, and that is cultural Marxism. And the attack on the family structure is not accidental. It's central to the goal of those trying to bring a cultural revolution. It's essential to understand what's happening in order to effectively combat it. And we have some important resources to help you do that. The first is a special report from our ministry called The Assault on Families, Parental Rights in the Crosshairs. There is a concerted movement to take authority for the child away from parents and to give it to the government. This is part and parcel of cultural Marxism. The Communist Manifesto even calls for the abolition of the family, which its authors saw as merely a tool of capitalism. Today, members of the far left are working through the United Nations, the government, and even the courts to redefine the family out of existence and transfer the responsibility for raising children to the state. This new special report, written by our own education specialist, Dr. Karen Gushta, explains what's happening and equips you to stand against it. We'll be happy to send you a copy of this special report called The Assault on Families, Parental Rights in the Crosshairs, as our thanks for your generous donation to the ongoing work of this ministry. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or go online to djkm.org. Understanding the goals of cultural Marxism will help you to make sense of what you're seeing on the news every day now. Because the family is the central building block of society, that is the primary target for the cultural Marxists. Family is where they're working to make their revolution take hold. That is what is behind the push for same-sex marriage, for eliminating religious freedom, and for the sexual anarchy in our schools and institutions. Dr. Paul Kengor, a professor of political science and best-selling author, has uncovered all this and more in his powerful book, Takedown: From Communists to Progressives, How the Left Has Sabotaged Family and Marriage. And we will send it to you along with the special report, The Assault on Families, Parental Rights in the Crosshairs, as our thanks for your generous donation of $50 or more to the ongoing work of this ministry. That's the powerful book, Takedown, by Dr. Paul Kengor, as well as the special report, The Assault on Families, as our thanks for a generous donation of $50 or more. Or we'll send you just the special report for your generous donation. Simply write to us at D. James Kennedy Ministries, Box 11154, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33339, or call toll-free 877-962-7677, or go online to djkm.org. Recently, the author of a new book on human existence claimed that beliefs about God are merely vestiges of our evolutionary development. Graham Lawton, the author of the book How to Be Human, is an editor of New Scientist magazine. And he says people still believe in God only because at one time it gave human beings an evolutionary survival benefit. In other words, belief in God was simply a useful lie that our brains told us, one we passed forward biologically, even though it's no longer needed according to him. Now, if this is not confusing you, you're not paying careful attention here. Of course, one major problem with this argument is that it is self-refuting. If our ideas about God are merely molecular reactions happening in our heads as dictated by evolution with no necessary connection to reality, then the same could be said of all of Mr. Lawton's ideas as well. Pure evolutionary theory, which denies any spiritual realm, tells us that only the physical exists. Our thoughts, therefore, are only a matter of neurons firing off in ways that our biology requires. Conveniently, in such a framework, there is no such thing as true or false, right or wrong. These ideas are just atoms banging into each other according to physical laws. Even our ideas about physical laws are just more atoms banging around in our heads. Listen, as any reasonable person can tell you, such a conception doesn't get you very far. And the very fact that Mr. Lawton wrote an entire book about it means he really doesn't believe it either. While on the one hand denying the existence of objective truth, he thinks his ideas about the non-existence of God are true, that they are in accord with reality and are worth taking the time to communicate to others. In other words, he simply doesn't really believe what he says he believes. But the bigger problem here is that he's simply wrong. Only a God who exists outside of our physical world can imbue it with meaning and truth that transcends the mechanical. And that's exactly who the Bible tells us God is. According to Scripture, the gospel is given to us according to the purpose of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His own will, so that we who were the first to hope in Christ might be to the praise of His glory. D. James Kennedy Ministries is standing for truth and defending your freedom. I'm Frank Wright. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Truths That Transform. We'll see you next time.
Next week on Truths That Transform.
We are all to be soldiers of Jesus Christ and to follow the captain of our well-fought fight.
They've lied repeatedly about their motives. But underneath, they want to destroy the family, replace it with government bureaucrats.
That's next week. Today's program is available on DVD for your gift to this ministry of any amount. Please call, write, or log on to our website today. This has been a production of D. James Kennedy Ministries.